So mine is the heavy task to just introduce the SCT working group. You saw already this slide, okay, with a nice picture of the ensemble board and chairs, and Dirk. So DIA is about verticals, right? But to connect verticals, we need horizontals. And that's why there is this SCT, the system enabling technologies, that is just horizontally positioned in order to connect the different working groups that we have and we will have even more in the future with DIA, okay? So this morning, what I heard a couple of times for railways and aerospace, if I remember correctly, was system of systems. Okay, in a certain way, SCT is the system of systems. It's a little bit recursive, right? Point is that it's true that in a certain way the evolution or innovation happens more quickly at the edges. So there is a lot of going on verticals, and we can think that the core of the network is stable in a certain way, and not that much innovating, which is not the correct way to see things, in my opinion, because again, we have the innovation at the edges, but the core has to adapt. This morning we had a nice talk about AI for net and how we can use AI, but there is also the other way around. So what net can do for AI and railways and NTN, etc., etc. So we need to connect the dots between the different working group and verticals. So SCT is meant to work on that side. And insofar, 9 themes and activities have been identified. Okay, goes from writing a white paper on the big network challenge that we see in front of us. Contribute to the EU research agendas. This is something already started because there is a contribution from DIA people in the SRIA agenda. Then the plan is to have also specific webinars on cybersecurity for railways, for example. Omar will continue. And or future architectures and workshops on AI, security for AI, or AI for security, and everything that is related to AI, which is something really big today. Okay, and also digital twins. They just mentioned everything that is related to the Challenge Fund. Okay, that some of them are shared between several working groups, including SCT. Okay, and my role is hence here because we will give the voice to people that are more active than me in the working group, and we'll give you an example of what is the plan of the kind of activities that will happen and are happening in SCT. So we will start with Harris from Lancaster University, then Jens from Interpeer. So Harris, welcome to the stage. It's already
yeah. I'll put it straight on.
Right. Hello from me also. I'm Harris Rotsos from Lancaster University, and I'm here to represent 2 themes in the SET working group. So, we'll show this in a bit. But yeah, so the first theme is around architectures, and this theme effectively what it tries to do is it tries to explore right now we have a number of standards defined in different architectures, HTTP, IETF, ETSI, where they all try to contribute different capabilities on different layers of the network. So the architecture stream tries to see how we can understand the capabilities of these different architectural approaches, what unique they offer to the systems, and then what are the differences effectively, what services are unique to each of these technologies. In parallel, we aim also to try to understand a bit the requirements for data communication networks from the top to bottom. So liaise with the verticals that have been discussed as as the other working groups, and try to understand the specific requirements that they have from network architecture to support their communication needs. This could be, for example, aspects of accessibility, resilience, reliability, or security. And our goal effectively is to try to understand where are the gaps, where we need to develop new things, provide recommendations, and provide a forum where we can have discussions about different concepts, principles, and how we can also propose new mechanisms in the upper layers of the system where basically we can evolve and enable new capabilities. And I have designed a bit of an interactive also thing, which we can show at the end also maybe in the question time. Yeah. So the other now theme that we have been exploring is on the topic of resilience. This is more my colleagues Paul Smith and David Hutchinson. They have long experience in the European Union organizing discussion around the topic of resilience. And when I'm talking about resilience, people straight away think about aspects like availability, for example. But resilience, at least to my colleagues, is a much broader concept. So they have been working on an initiative a few years ago called the Recordis Cost Action, where basically they were trying to design new methodologies to manage the resilience as a life cycle process, not only when a service is running, but how you design it, how you maintain, how you identify risks, and how do you respond to these risks in a long-running process. And based on that, try to effectively formulate methodologies to manage the resilience of communication systems. So within the DIA, we try to bring some of this thinking back, and effectively our goal is again working with vertical working groups, try to understand a bit what resilience means to different working groups, what resilience for data communication means for different vertical working groups, collect requirements, and then try to see also how we can evolve technologies to enable new capabilities that can improve the resilience. That could be, for example, metrics monitoring. We discussed a lot about data exchanges and anomaly detection, AI models. All this stuff, can we include them into a design process and a methodology to design resilient systems, for example? Also, how do we remediate or how do we react to challenges? And potentially even doing long-term risk analysis on different sectors. What kind of risks different verticals they might be facing on the data communication challenges effectively. I have in the slides also the contact. We're still setting up. It's something that we started over the summer and trying to coordinate people. We already have some people joining also, like Jacek Rak, who was directing the Recordis Cost Action. But you're very welcome also to reach out to us and then try to coordinate and foster collaboration and discussions. And that's all from my side.
Thank you very much. Stay around if there are questions later.
Thank you. Thank you.
This is also. Should we just continue?
No.
I was listening, so I put it up.
I know it's a bad window anyway. So. There you are.
Right, so thank you. Jens Wienkoser. I tried to riff on the general theme here and call this talk Addressing Grand Challenges through free, deep, and open source software. And I've been told to be quick because we don't have too much time for me. So I tried to be quick. Just to let you know, a lot of you I've talked to about this whole topic already at the end of last year. And then I sort of dropped off the radar because I had to organize a move. And now I can start picking it up again. And I remember the response at the time was a bit varied. It kind of ranged all over the board from people not even saying, yeah, sure, obviously we have to deal with this, and people saying, I don't even know why this is coming up here. So I kind of need to address more the second crowd, I think, and I'm very happy that so many people of you already mentioned open source, data sharing, and similar topics, because this is what I'm talking about here, basically. So I want to talk about 3 events that happened since last year. Lots of things happened, but these 3 I think matter to us. Number one, I don't know how much you're aware of this, but within the horizon there's this Next Generation Internet Initiative, and I received the news that it might actually be ending soon. I have no idea where this is going to go. I do know that people are working hard to keep going. Yes, you can say something to this, I'm pretty sure.
I can tell you.
Yeah, I would love to, but I'm trying to hurry. So I would love to hear this afterwards. And if you hear something like Next Generation Internet and DIA, it kind of sounds like the same thing, right? We should be doing this. But if you look at how it's structured, I've worked for NGI, on sub-funds of NGI. It is very different to how you might think. The sub-funds are very venture capital-like structured. They are very small runs that try to get you within about 6 months from nothing to a minimum viable product. And that's not really how research works. This is how products work. And try to sort of contrast this to the timelines that you all know. You know, we have something like TRL levels in EU funding, and we have 9 of them, and the grants tend to go over several years, and you raise them by about 1-2 TRL levels over the course of a grant. We're talking about a handful of years to a low number of decades to get from nothing to publication, essentially, to production use. There is some disconnect here in how the internet should, on what scale technology evolves here. And I think the reason I'm mentioning this is because one of the interesting things about NGI that it partially mandates open source publication of the source code. Depends a bit on the sub-fund and the details, so not all of them do that, but it exists in that space, and I think there's going to be more of it. That brings me to the second thing, and I've titled this Digital Sovereignty and Digital Commons, because the buzzword, as far as I understand it right now, in policy space is digital commons, and it encompasses both open source, open data, data sharing, all these things. How do we create a commons that is sustainable and usable by everyone? And as part of this, well, it's not directly related, but sort of that fits into this theme. I did try to drop the Eurostack initiative into DIA at some point some months ago. They produced an initial report of about 128 pages of where things have to go. And my summary is a bit ungrateful, I have to say this. I will be very honest with you. This is the key takeaway that I have here, is that it doesn't really mention longer term R&D very much. There are some mentions that say, yeah, we have to pay attention to it, but then they don't go into details, they don't provide a vision. They're closest to something where you can see concrete things that need to be addressed is actually the stuff that's about 6G SNS. That's the best worked out, and I could see potential there, but most of the rest of the document has nothing to do with this. It is really focused on replicating US hyperscalers here in Europe, or chip foundries here in Europe, so that we achieve some kind of sovereignty through those means. But one of the things that keeps cropping up in the context of this, and this is why I bring it up, is that we're so far behind in Europe that the only way we can get there is if we use open source. If we use open source, we need to produce it. Otherwise, there's nothing we can use 10 years from now. And so a lot of the conversation right now is about how do we create sustainable digital commons. And then there's the other news that has nothing to do with Europe, but still has to do with us. I don't know how much of you have been personally affected by this, but the National Science Foundation in the US has cut funding. Today I read it's 56% funding cut. I know that in my spaces everybody from the US is saying, oh, look, my funding is equal, I don't know what to do, let's go to Europe, because we don't know what else to do. It's great for us, but we also need to fund this thing. And I don't know, didn't even bother to research how much specific industry is affected by this, but there's clearly a very significant funding void created right now. And again, simplifying for the sake of a quick talk. The internet is pretty much an American project, or at least American driven. We use American technologies, we contribute, we evolve it, we do all kinds of things, but the core of technology is very American. If America stops funding the internet on the timeline of the TRL levels, decades, we will not notice this tomorrow, but 10 years from now, there's not going to be evolution in the internet anymore. Very broad statement, I know. There are other sources of funding, but we should look at this closely, in my opinion. And no, this has nothing to do with open source, but more with us here. So, what do I think open source should do? Open source policy work should be in the year. First of all, we have to understand the language that politics is using and use it ourselves, in my opinion. And it's not about technology. It's not about open source at all. Maybe it's about data sharing. Certainly it's about data, about the digital commons, right? That's the thing. It's about sovereignty. And I try to make some broad statements, right? I know we will discuss the detail to death, but broad statements. From a political point of view, innovation is something that's driving the economy. And so this kind of timeline, which has 6 months to a minimum viable product, makes sense from a political point of view. This is what innovation is. Because that's the sort of motivation that they understand. Stimulating the economy is a very political activity. Making sure that 10 years from now something works back on the internet is not something that is on the mind of every average politician. And they are taking sovereignty. There's a reason sovereignty has been mentioned a lot in political circles. It's because the Open Source Initiative has for decades tried to lobby for open source policy and failed until they hit by accident upon this term of digital sovereignty. This is what we're trying to do. And politics understand digital sovereignty. We need to be sovereign also in the digital realm. How do we achieve this? Through open source. Suddenly this clicked. And I think we need to use this language if we go out to lobby for funding. That's really the main point of this slide. We need to make sure that we focus also on the longer term R&D funding, not on the short term economy stimulating stuff. That's also important. Also the hyperscaler replication. I have no problem with this, right? Just to put this out there. But we need to also change the language in which they discuss how funding has to happen. And we can make sure to focus also on this loss of NSF funding, because we now have a strategic opportunity in Europe to help shape the future of the internet. And I think this kind of moment comes about once in a lifetime. So who are they going to hear this from? If not from us. And now looking inward, what we should also do within DIA is talk about business here with open source, because on the far end of the spectrum that I mentioned earlier, where people were confused about why should we talk about open source, I get it, and it doesn't sound like a research topic so much. Luckily, a lot of you have already covered some reasons to do this, but I want to also talk about it's not at all a requirement to give the intellectual property away, right? You can have business models where you retain valuable intellectual property, still publish open source, and benefit from both. It's not a requirement to give it away. It's not anti-business. It does mean that you have to shift your thinking. For once, it's a huge resource for companies. I know, this is why I mentioned here this curl.se, libcurl, maybe you don't know it. Everybody in this room uses it. I can guarantee it. It's on the Mars rovers, it's on your TV, it's on your phone, it's everywhere. And if we didn't use this, then we would have to build it ourselves. So it's a good thing to have this. And we can also see this as a business opportunity, and this is a bit more complex. On the one hand, you can look at the previous slide and say, okay, if we influence politics a little bit on how to fund our activities, that's something of a business opportunity. But you can also examine businesses like Red Hat, which have been very, very successful with publishing massive amounts of open source. And you can look at things like the PlayStation, which many don't know maybe, but it runs open source operating systems that they just don't publish because they don't have to. So, clearly it's not anti-business to talk about open source, but I think we as DIA can also help our members understand this better. And I think this is kind of my proposal here. First of all, well, the typical term here is an open source policy office. I think we should maybe have one to deal externally with messaging around this topic, and also to help members understand how they can maybe fit this into their own business. And the other thing is that, well, maybe this is more of an operational thing. Maybe this is more executing a strategy that already exists. Maybe we should do the strategic work more in something like a working group or as an activity in ZWG, or that's what I'm talking about in this slot here. So I want to ask what your interest in this is. And I think there's a poll, you mentioned this later, Dirk, where these questions are asked. I encourage you to answer this. And that is, I think, it. Was this fast enough? I hope it was fast enough.
Okay, thank you very much.